Let's talk about water. We all love it. We all love water. Nature's Diet Coke. Water in the UK is, as some of you might know, a privatised utility, which I think I'm right in saying the UK is relatively unique in. It's not like the only country that does it anywhere, but of all of the utilities, electricity, gas, other stuff like train lines, water I think has often been the one that countries have been cautious about privatising. This is a kind of stat I've heard before, that the UK is the only country in the world for whom the whole water industry is private. So England has like a privatised water system, which means that a private company owns the sewerage system, a water supply, and I'm fairly sure operates the treatment of water as well. So taking the water and putting it through a big sieve. And as a privatized service, water is like the most weird iteration of this model. All of the other kind of privatizations in England and elsewhere in the world often have this veneer of a pretense of competition. Water has none of that. Just each area of England has been assigned a water company. Essentially, with this system, what could happen is water companies just go, well, it's going to cost £1 million a year to have some water to your house. And they really could just crank it up and crank it up and crank it up. Part of the reason that water companies have been able to make these humongous profits is because they've been raising the prices that they are charging to customers, whilst at the same time not investing a huge amount of money in maintaining and updating the water network. Much like phone lines or energy systems, whatever, you have systems of pipes and sewers, etc. And these are getting older and older and older. And they are getting increasingly leaky. So according to this BBC report from a year ago, raw sewage was dumped into English rivers 375,000 times last year by water companies. They'll sort of say that it's a leak or it's a kind of mistake or it's overflow, because we have a weird system in the UK where some of our drainage for rain and some of our drainage for sewage is the same system, and so that can be a problem sometimes. But essentially, water companies have started trying to get away with just pumping sewage that they can't be bothered to treat just into rivers. So there is a entity, I guess, called Ofwat, which is basically in charge of regulating the water industry. And one of its things is kind of negotiating how much water companies should be allowed to charge and how much bills should be allowed to go up each year. It's worth saying that water profits for water companies have been incredibly high. So in 2022 to 2023, England's water firms made £1.7 billion in pre-tax profits. This is up 82% since 2018 to 2019, when the same companies made £955 million. It is a profitable business, and you can see why, right? You're basically given an area. The water network was pre-built. It pre-existed privatisation, and so you get to negotiate with Ofwat to decide what the price is going to be, and then you just get to charge that to absolutely everyone. As Tweety says, turns out monopolies make money, right? You are literally given a monopoly by the state and told to crack on, and that is incredibly profitable. So for a long time, owning a water company has been an incredible way to make money, because you have a captive customer base, right, that in many ways literally cannot get water or get rid of water in any other way. There is no option to not pay the water. You can't be like, I'm not going to use the taps. And the only kind of pressure against you just keeping to hike up prices is having to negotiate with the regulator. But what tends to happen in these systems is that companies just pour loads of money into lobbying, and they get really, really, really good at negotiating. I mean, this clip here was suggesting that the current Thames water boss was previously head of Exwat, the regulator. You end up with these revolving doors whereby people who work for the regulator end up going to work for water companies to advise them. And so you end up with these relationships where if you work for Ofwat, it's very much in your interest to not be too harsh on any water companies because you want to keep open the option that you can jump ship and go and join one of them a bit later. It's kind of just ends up being self-regulation, right? And at the same time, as often happens with kind of like corporate takeovers, the water companies have been allowed to kind of like take on debt as the company at the same time as they're paying money out to shareholders. Their argument would be that like the company is investing for the future at the same time as it just so happens to be paying profits out to shareholders. But what that looks like to the rest of us is the idea that, you know, they're essentially taking out a loan to pay themselves, and the way that privately owned companies work in terms of how buying and selling shares means that some of them might not be around in 10 years to find out the consequences in terms of like actually paying off that debt. Thames Water has got kind of worse and worse with this. It has become like so laden with debt that it's kind of heading towards failure. Shareholders have kind of been asked to put more money in. Oh, here we go. Sorry, Britain's biggest water supplier said on Thursday its shareholders had refused. They've been asked to put in additional funding, which kind of can happen with companies sometimes. The company will kind of turn to its shareholders and go, you know, you need to put more money in. And they've sort of said, you know, the only way we're going to pay this off is if we can bump our bills up. Apparently the figure it's looking for is 40%. And it also wants to have a discount on fines that it currently owes for some of the leaks and stuff that we're just talking about, whilst continuing to pay out dividends. The result is that there is a chance that Thames Water could end up being nationalised. In some ways, is this a bailout for both management who don't have to pay back their bonuses or for shareholders who don't have to pay back dividends? And it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The most fascinating example with this is Southeastern, which is one of the rail networks in the UK, or a company that ran trains, got renationalised a few years back. Basically, the government did what's called taking back the franchise. What happened was satisfaction went up and it became more profitable than it previously had been under its private ownership. And these little quirks, when they happen, do end up being a really good argument and a good kind of fulcrum for making that broader argument for renationalisation of these key industries, which are infrastructure factors which really should always be under state ownership and control. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Thames Water. I don't necessarily think that will instantly happen, but does taking away that profit motive, which isn't even really a profit motive in the case of water, it is really an extraction motive, because it is about how much money can you extract while still remaining within the law. Sometimes it's a case of how much money can you extract while skirting the law, as is happening at the moment in the case of all of these leaks and chucking out of sewage. I don't think the Labour Party have water renationalisation in their manifesto. Yet last year the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves ditched the Labour Party's policy to nationalise water. But that does seem to be the only way out. The UK currently is a country that refuses to invest in things. We see that perfectly with the water network, wherein it is just being used to extract cash out for investment companies and not being invested in, and that's not putting us in a great place. But it'll be interesting if Thames Water is renationalised to see what happens there.